had faith in us to be good stewards of this funding for our kids in AISD. There were also bond elections. AISD did not have a bond election, but we want to share some of that data as well. There were 34 districts in the state who had a bond election, and you can have more than one proposition for a bond election, just like the city and the county can. So there were a total of 57 propositions. 31 of those passed for a total of 54%. So out of those 34 districts, 19 passed at least one. And again, I want to highlight our neighbor and friends up at Round Rock, also in Travis County. They had 4 proposition elections. They passed 3 of those. And the 3 that they passed, they had just as strong of a passing rate as we did. Unfortunately, they did not pass their bond for an athletic stadium, which has been pretty common across the state. When you look at what are the bond elections that are passing, those that are looking at repair or redoing buildings do fairly well. Those focused on athletic stadiums traditionally have not passed in the state. Overall, about half of the money that was requested through bonds was passed, but about 3 of those that unfortunately did not pass really accounted for the bulk of that. Houston ISD had a $4.4 billion bond, Frisco just above $1 billion, and Northwest just below $1 billion. So those 3 alone counted for more than half of all of the requests for those bonds. So our proposition brought in an additional about $41 million annually to AISD. We have already started the work, and I'm going to go through a chart in just a moment, in making sure that we've made those market adjustments that we've committed to. So that's increased to some of our teachers and staff salaries, and I'll go through that in more detail. We also set aside a little over $3 million for additional supports in the district, and that was focused on 3 different things. First, that's continued commitment for special education. Since we have been under the agreed order with TEA, Superintendent Segura and our board have made supporting special education kind of priority 1A. And so we put a lot of focus into that to make sure that we have the staff that we need so that our kids are being evaluated on time, getting served properly at their campus, and that they have those qualified special education teachers in their classroom. So we will spend some additional funding to support special education. We are also going to create content interventionists for Austin ISD. So these are academic specialists. You know, they may be in reading, they may be in math, they may be in both, but they do that really targeted support for our students. So the teacher, of course, provides the main instruction for all of our kids, and our teachers also do a wonderful job of ensuring that that instruction is catered for every individual student's need in their classroom. But sometimes we do have some students that just need a little bit more support. Maybe it's in the classroom, maybe it's a pullout from the classroom, maybe it's in combination with that teacher. But that's where that content interventionist will come in and help provide that additional support for that student to make sure that they're staying up on grade level with their peers. Lastly, we put some funding aside for mental health. And we have already made 2 commitments. That is to increase our mental health supports in our police team, because they are typically one of the, when there is a mental health outcry, they are one of the groups that has reached out for that. And then also in our counseling team, our mental health support. And then we want to continue to see how we can provide some additional support through that. And then $20 million of that is set aside to help offset our overall deficit, which will help us long-term, well, and short-term, because that's some of the, you know, when we're looking at how we can address our deficit, that's $20 million that we don't need to take from our schools now, or take from the systems that we're providing for our schools. So we're really thankful for the work of our community, of our trustees advocating for this, and I know that all of our elected officials really helped advocate for the need of Austin students with this, so thank you for that. What you see here is a little bit of our timeline. So of course the election was on November 5th. We have already started mailing out, as a matter of fact, I believe all staff should have already received their compensation notification on how this affected their overall pay. And that either went into effect immediately, or it will, I believe our next paycheck is next Friday, December 13th, thank you, on December 13th. And that's actually retroactive all the way back to the beginning of the year. So that was another commitment that we made for our staff, that if this passes, it won't just start in December, it'll be retroactive to the start of the year, so that it'll be made whole for that entire year. We are going to continue the discussions on our content interventionist, hoping to start rolling those out next semester. And then also some of those other supports that I just mentioned, rolling those out next semester. So I want to briefly talk about our market adjustments. 85% of all of our regular benefit eligible staff, so that means more than the half-time staff, receive some type of market adjustment. And one thing that I'll call out on that is that we also made an intentional investment into classified. And Austin IC, just like our city and county counterparts, we're almost kind of competing with one another now at this point on some of our classified pay raises. But not only did we raise to $20 last year, but then we did an additional 25-cent increase for all classified. So whether they saw a market increase or not, we ensured that every classified staff saw at least a 25-cent increase. We also saw average increases for some of our hardest to staff positions and most necessary staff when talking about special education, with our speech language pathologist and some of our other licensed support in special education, average increase of about 10%. And then what you see right there in the middle is the average increase of bands for teachers. And if Superintendent Segura would show a graph, and I wish I had the graph, I'll try and make it with my hands as best as I can. You know, when you typically look at a teacher's salary, honestly, it's kind of flat. You know, whether you've started in 1 year and then 20 years later, you know, the increase is there, but it's not a sharp line. It's a fairly flat line, and we really wanted to ensure that we're making that line just a little bit more sharp, that we're really increasing pay for our teachers, especially those later years. We've heard jokes, and not ones that we really appreciate, but some of our neighboring districts who will say that they let us train the teachers and then they hire them once they were trained because they were offering a little bit more later, even though we were all competitive at the beginning. Now that we can be a little bit more competitive with our teacher pay later in their career, we really know that that's going to mean more teachers staying in the classroom and staying in AISD, which is exactly what we want to see, and we're really excited about seeing the long-term effect of that.
So, if I could just ask one quick question. I like that you show the averages for increase. I like that you show who will be impacted. Sometimes what the public misses, sometimes what we are asked is, so how does that get to the stakeholder? What is it? What does the kid get that he didn't have before this? What are we allowed to do? Where are we allowed to serve that we weren't able to serve before? So yes, we should compensate our teachers more and better. My parents were teachers, I understand. At the end of the day, though, folks are saying, how is this going to impact my kids at the classroom level?
Yeah.
Or at the campus level?
Well, I think one of the things that our trustees and I talk about since the moment I came on board was this fact that the success for our students in the improved learn environment, it's founded in our teachers.
Yes.
We can't talk about it enough. We have to treat our teachers as professionals. We have to recognize that without them, the system and our students will not get what they need, especially our most historically underserved students. And so in 2023, we made an aggressive investment in AISD, in ourselves, in educators. We did a 7% raise, we increased stipends, and this year we were able to maintain a 97.4% staffing rate, which is much higher than anywhere else in the region. And then you think about the correlation of principals to superintendent and stability. So 2 years ago, we hired over 20 principals. This last year, we hired 6. And all of them were known to the organization. And so this stability allows for the professional development, the relationship with the student, the relationship with the families, all of those things to really be reinforced and support our students. And I think what's really great about what we're able to do is, at the end of the day, our resources have to be distributed equitably. And so we are building tools into the system to ensure that that occurs across all things, whether it's operations, finance, talent and strategy, all of it. And so this is a huge step in that direction, but at the end of the day, it has a meaningful impact on how we serve our students in Austin ISD.
I think it is important for people to know that. I think it's critically important that we're able to demonstrate how our students will be better served. As we talk about Robin Hood and what it means to Austin ISD, I think we have to talk about it in the context of how our students are served, or how we can't serve them because of the system that is in place. So I just want to make sure that people understand.
Yep.
Want to make sure that they can see down at the campus level how we're being impacted, but how our overall system is frankly terrible and does not allow us to build the staffing levels that are necessary to serve the kids we're seeing.
And Commissioner, one of the things that I'll tell you, there's a story about Webb Middle School, and I'm sure Michael Coyle wouldn't mind me sharing this. In years past, when you think about what principals and administrators have to work through as they staff up for the coming school year, it is frantic, right, if you don't have the supports centrally. And so years past, you had administrators really trying to find those individuals to bring them into the classroom, and a couple things are going to happen. A, it may not always be the best fit. Two, it may not be the educator who has that tenured experience. Or three, it takes away from the planning that's required to actually launch a successful school year. And so when having conversations with some of our campuses that have really seen an increase in stability, Webb Middle School being one of them, Michael Coyle, our principal there, will tell you, he was almost fully staffed before the first day of summer. And when you think about what that affords the school in the summertime as they plan professional development, as they think about the student needs, as they think about the master schedule, it is a game changer. So all of this is tied together, and that's just one kind of small tangential example of just creating space in the system so that our educators can do what they do best. And so I appreciate that comment, but there are many, many other stories like that, and I think we need to do a better job of communicating them out, but sometimes it can be a little nuanced and we lose the connection, so I appreciate the comment. So is it in the presentation? Okay, sorry.
And I just wanted to piggyback off what you just said, Superintendent. At our next board meeting, which is next Thursday, we're actually going to have a little board retreat. So people who really want to get into the weeds, we have identified, or the superintendent has identified 6 campuses that have the highest need. And we are tracking them extremely closely so that we don't have another Mendez Middle School situation. And what the administration has done is, and they've sort of pioneered an approach to ensure that we are measuring the inputs into those campuses and they are getting the resource allocations needed to ensure that those campuses remain fully staffed, that they're getting good teachers, that there are key factors that are really highly leveraged when it comes to student outcomes. And so as a board, our job is to, track that. His job is to make sure it happens. And so we really are going to be going into that more deeply through the budget angle next Thursday. But I hear you. And this Prop A passing, I can't even tell you how meaningful that is to help us actually actualize this vision. So thank you. Yes.
Well, first of all, congratulations on getting Prop A through. We're going to segue to intergovernmental relations, and I appreciate everything you're doing with this money, and obviously the community supports it, but I can never let a conversation go on these investments without recognizing that we are spending more money, sending more money out of our school system than we're able to spend in, even as we have dire needs within our school district. And so as we'll segue into the intergovernmental, appreciate everything you're doing to make the best use of this money, but I can only imagine if you got to use all of the money that the voters were just taxed for, what we could be doing for our kids in our community. And I just think we have to make sure that people recognize the limits that are placed on our school district, the taxes that we have to endure, from the state property tax that we have for our schools at this point in time.
Councilor Alter, that's I very much appreciate that comment. And what I don't want to leave this meeting without saying is that there are still cuts that we have to move through and navigate through. And we were very honest about this before we even started the Proposition A process. But those cuts now don't have to be as deep. And we are able to create a strategy that keeps us from having to encroach on the classroom. And so we have, part of the work that we'll be doing in the work session is just getting additional feedback from our trustees to ensure that we're aligned, but there's certainly efficiencies to be gained around PEIMS reporting, master schedule development, portable reduction strategies. There's a lot of efficiencies when you're an organization of this size, and so we now have a little bit of breathing room to get through that difficult work that will then continue to drive down our expenses, and cross our fingers, hopefully in the next legislative session, which is what we're about to talk about, some funding will be released to help ensure that those things that are truly impactful, adversely impactful to our students, don't have to take place, right? Because we'll be past that. So thank you for the comment. Very much appreciate it.
So that sounds like a good segue to our next, oh, did you have one?
Yeah, I really just want to acknowledge, again, congrats on your Prop A, but I want to acknowledge the enormous work that you've done with a heavy foot from the state. The threats around the middle school and the work that you've had to do there, but also the difficulty that so many teachers and staff have been working under. But you've stabilized that. You made an investment in trying to have your teacher pay keep pace. And I think it's worth repeating those stats. You were losing a lot of experienced teachers, but you've turned that around. And I think it's really important for the public to know that. And also, when people get frustrated with property taxes, which are high, they need to be communicating with the state legislature, because I think this was true even before your Prop A, but aren't we the second largest funder of all public schools in Texas, behind the state of Texas? Yes. So our taxpayers in Austin are the second highest funder of all public schools in Texas, because of the way the legislature has structured school finance. And it's profoundly unfair. No, it's very intentional. It's very intentional. And people really need to understand that so they can focus their communication on the state legislature. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Commissioner Shea. And I guess as I close out here, I shared with the trustees, I think probably via text, this screen capture of the wire transfer back in the spring, and it was $699 million that was transferred out to the state via recapture. And again, it's a system. It's something that, legislators will have to address. But, we're hopeful that increase in public funding is what the legislature will consider, which is what I think we're about to talk about here for too long. Of course.
Thank you. Yes, increasing the basic allotment is the mechanism by which we will be able to reduce recapture, and we're going to hear so much more about that and more next, which is we're going to have presentations from each of our three entities, and we're going to have the City of Austin with Rick Ramirez, the Intergovernment Relations Deputy Officer, followed by Travis County Julie Wheeler, welcome, and followed by our beloved Edna Ramon Butts to talk about our legislative agenda. So we will start with City of Austin, Rick Ramirez. Please begin.
Well, thank you very much. If we could get our slides up. There they are.
That's why you're beloved.
Yeah. Well, thank you all very much for asking me to join you all today. I'm very excited to talk about our legislative program. Believe it or not, we are less than 40 days away from the start of the legislative session, I know. But on the good side, we're less than 180 days from the end of the next legislative session. So that's a plus. Today I'll be going over.
Before we were just whispering here that we would love for you to introduce yourself. I'm sorry, I forgot to ask you to do that. Yes, tell us a little about you and then launch in.
Yeah, so my name is Rick Ramirez. I'm the Deputy Intergovernmental Relations Officer for the City of Austin. And again, thank you very much for asking me to join you. I will be going over our legislative program. We'll be bringing both the draft state legislative program and the federal legislative program to City Council next Thursday. So we'll be talking about some draft position statements that will be brought up to them. I'll talk about our new legislative team. We have a lot of change at the City of Austin in the Intergovernmental Relations Office, so we'll talk a little bit about that, and I'll give you some next steps as well. Okay, so our legislative agenda is developed by our mayor and council, and it directs the way that the Intergovernmental Relations Office works in the Capitol. Our language is intentionally broad, and it allows us to have some flexibility when we go to the Capitol. There's many different bills, and they're filed in different ways, and this broad language allows us to have some flexibility on how we react. And we couldn't do it without our departments. Our departments are our industry experts. They help us to analyze the bills. We have bill reviewers in almost every single department throughout the city. They help us understand what the impacts would be for our residents and how we provide services, and whether or not those impacts would come with additional costs. So when we're developing the legislative agenda, we take into consideration a couple of various factors. We speak with our legislators. We talk to the delegation, talk about their priorities and what they want to accomplish next legislative session. We also pay attention to the rest of the legislature to find out what they're talking about during the interim and how that might impact us. We measure and balance our needs, our wants, and our nice-to-haves. We talk about the political environment and how current events might impact what's going to happen at the legislative session. A good example of that would be the recent storms in Houston that left many people, especially CenterPoint Energy customers, out of electricity for quite a while, which means that we had a lot of interim session hearings about electric reliability, and that could have some impacts on Austin Energy. And then obviously we just need to be able to expect the unexpected. There's so many different variables that happen with a system that has so many individuals and different personalities, and so we're nice and flexible and ready to react. So at a glance, our legislative agenda is mostly left unchanged. There are a few substantive changes that I'll go over in a little while. But our legislative program is very much like any other legislative program for any other city throughout the state. We like to be able to preserve local decision-making, the city council's ability to have control over zoning and ordinances and have local regulations and local lawmaking ability. We also want to be able to protect the city's financial resources and make sure that we oppose any kind of unfunded mandates or any legislation that would impact the fiscal health of our city. On community health and safety, we want to be able to support healthcare access and just protect the health, well-being, and safety of our citizens. And then we'd like to protect Austin's beautiful natural resources and encourage sustainability and invest in critical infrastructure projects. We did have some substantive changes that we'll be bringing to City Council on Thursday. These substantive changes, though, are informed by council resolutions that council has made throughout the last 2 years since we adopted the last legislative agenda. So these have all been kind of already vetted through City Council. In terms of public safety, we did add an item for support for forensic science operations. In particular, there is talk about supporting for paths of certification for apprenticeship programs for forensic science. We are hearing that there is going to be a bill related to that, and we will be supporting that. And then the last legislative session, there were a lot of bills related to fentanyl testing. There was a bill that would have had Austin PD test every single drug confiscated for fentanyl, which would have been very expensive and very onerous. So we'll be watching for that as well. In addition, there's going to be bills related to flood insurance, And so we have a position statement related to supporting funding to reduce the risk to lives and property. Also, to be able to make sure that flood insurance is more affordable and allow for it to be able to be paid on a monthly basis. There's also a new position statement regarding drone use. Last legislative session, there was a bill that would have banned cities from being able to buy drones that had components that were from certain countries. Unfortunately, there are many of the drones that we use have to have components that are made from certain countries, so that would have essentially grounded our entire drone fleet. Going on to homelessness, we have been speaking with legislators all through the interim about homelessness and have been talking about solutions where the state would be able to come in and have some funding for that. We've been talking about data sharing for homelessness as well. And so we expect there will be quite a few bills on this topic. This is going to be one of the largest topics of the legislative session as we move forward. City Council also passed a equal rights ordinance, and so that's part of the legislative agenda as well. We're also including support for responsible use of artificial intelligence. And again, on drone use, that's not just for public safety, but we have many departments that use drones. And so being able to make sure that we have access to drones for all different types of uses is going to be very important. And then on transportation, we added a position statement that specifically called out Project Connect and Our Future 35. That's the cap and stitch program. We want to be able to support legislation that has funding for those types of projects. In addition, there's a lot of other priorities that we have. We have a position statement that is opposing super preemption, is what we called it. Y'all might have recalled the Death Star bill that was passed last legislative session, HB 2127. Recently, actually, just the first day of filing, there was a bill that would have created the District of Austin and basically do away with our municipal government. I call that super duper preemption. And so we're definitely going to be opposing that as we did last time around. There's also bills that have already been filed on community advocacy. That's what we, that's the term we use whenever we talk about taxpayer-funded lobbying. There's been bills that would bar not just cities, but counties and school districts from being able to hire professional communicators to help them navigate through the legislative session. Again, homelessness is going to be an issue. Land use preemption had a lot of discussion during the interim legislative session, so we'll be watching that as well. And then there's also been bills that have already been filed on DEI programs. On the federal side, it mirrors much of what we have on the state side as well. We included the LGBTQIA or DEI agenda item to the federal agenda as well. On the climate crisis, we wanted to make sure that we have a new administration that's coming in to the White House. We wanted to make sure that in our legislative agenda, we had the ability to make sure to tell them that we'd like to continue to follow through with the allocated funds that have gone through the IRA, BIL, and IIJA, all the infrastructure funding that had been passed in this last administration. We want to make sure that there's no clawbacks of any of that funding that went through. And also we wanted to make sure that there's some additional funding for future projects as we move through this very, very important part of Austin's history. We have similar language from the state agenda on Project Connect and Our Future 35, that's cap and stitch program. And then we removed a position statement related to emergency triage, treat, and transport model because that program had ended, but we did include position statements for EMS reimbursement for care and suicide prevention and awareness, and that came from council resolutions as well. We also have a position statement regarding family stabilization grants, and that's to support legislation or initiatives to implement a cash-based program for the purposes of supporting residents and families. Some additional priorities with congressional session, next congressional session. Broadband access is also going to be a very important discussion at the federal level. And this doesn't just stop at rural areas that have access issues, but it also hits some of our most vulnerable communities. People have just a hard time to access the internet, either because it's hard to get to their neighborhoods or it's hard to be able to afford it. Again, community advocacy is a big deal. Housing and homelessness is also a big deal. Mental health was included because of a recent council resolution, and family stabilization grants as well. So, what to expect for the next legislative session? There were almost 1,500 bills that were filed on the first day of the pre-filing for the legislative session. Compare that to last legislative session, which was only 920. Last session, there were over 8,000 bills that were filed. We're expecting that number to be blown out of the water, maybe 8,500 to 9,000 bills filed. And the number keeps on growing every single session. Just a side note, about 20 to 25% of the legislature's time is spent on regulating cities or local governments in some sort of way. And so that is the reason why we have such a robust program. The 89th session is going to begin January 14th, and committee hearings usually begin in late January, early February, and that's because you can't have committee hearings in the first couple of weeks of the legislature. It's an old, archaic constitutional thing where you had people from El Paso needing to ride a horse all the way to the legislature, so they put it off for two weeks before they can start hearing committee hearings. The legislature will adjourn sine die on June 2nd, 2025. Sine die just means without a day in Latin, basically saying that we're going to adjourn without setting a date to meet again. Some things that we're expecting to see again during the legislative session, specifically for Austin, there's going to be some Austin energy bills that have to do with rate setting, our governance structure, weatherization, especially after the hurricane that hit Houston, and many other things. The community advocacy bills will definitely be very important as well. There will be bills directly impacting Project Connect and the ability for cities to be able to use local government corporations in their funding structures for these types of projects. There's also going to be restrictions on city finances in general. We've already seen expenditure caps. We've had revenue caps in the past, but now they're going on the other side of the equation and looking at expenditures as well. So that is going to be kind of the next step for regulation on city finances. So moving on to Congress, I just want to take this time to thank our congressional delegation. They have helped us secure over $24 million for the city of Austin since earmarks were renewed back in FY22. We started off in FY22 at $3.5 million, and recently in FY24, that moved up to $12.06 million. We're still in the process right now for FY25. We're looking at the appropriations bill, and hopefully we could get that done before the end of the year. But that has gone all the way into March or April, so it takes a little while. We're going to be beginning the process soon to develop our community funding projects for FY26, so that will be coming soon. That process.
Excuse me, if I could just say,
yes, sir.
When I look and it says earmarks, that sounds like a negative phrase. Could we identify the things that serve the community that
Yes,
were
sir.
brought to us through this process?
Yes, sir.
If we can look at outcomes, I mean, when you say earmarks, I think pork immediately, as opposed to who was served. If we can start with who was served, I think we can make a better case.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for that. And actually, the Congress has moved away from that colloquial term of earmarks and has now called that program the Community-Funded Projects Program. Going into the process, so during this time in winter, the winter timeframe is when we start speaking with our departments to identify project requests, community-funded project requests. We will be submitting those submissions to our congressional delegation as we get into the spring around the March-April timeframe. And then it's off to the races. They go to the they go through their subcommittees in the appropriations committee, and then the appropriations bill goes all the way through the rest of the year. We wouldn't expect to spend those funds until FY26 budget. All right, now it's time to talk about our new legislative team. We do have a new director, Carrie Rogers. She's our Intergovernmental Relations Officer and has replaced Bree Franco. She unfortunately was not able to be here today, but she is watching online. I'm the deputy officer, and I'm going to be over state and federal legislative affairs. We will have a local and regional administrator who's going to be hired soon, and that person will be in charge of developing the relationship between us and our community partners. And then a new thing for this year is the Intergovernmental Relations Office will now be taking on grants and legislative funding requests as well. So that's a big new project for the Intergovernmental Relations Office. So next steps is we're going to be receiving any feedback from the committee. We're going to go to mayor and council to have them consider the legislative agenda on December 12th. We will communicate the adopted programs to the legislative delegations and stakeholders, and we'll post a legislative update on the IGR web page. We'll do outreach meetings with our delegations and socialize the agenda, and then we'll continue to do weekly updates to our city leadership. And with that, I can answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
I've got a, I know that there have been a lot of de-annexations, and I know that that's an issue where I think there's a concern at the legislature, although y'all know better than this, that there were some unintended consequences of that. I have to assume it's happening in other cities around the state, although I don't know. And it obviously hurts the ability of those cities to even have a tax base. Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious to know if there's any sense about whether or not the legislature might actually do something to correct it.
Yes, I've heard that there's been quite a few legislators who weren't really sure exactly what they passed, especially with the ETJ bill that they passed last legislative session. There were some communities that were hurt by it, some communities that were actually gained something by that. And I do think that that might be a subject that might come back up. There were some discussions during the interim as well about it. As far as actual disannexation of city things that are within the city limits, Austin was really the only community that had a major disannexation because of that, Lost Creek. Many of the other cities that were included in the bill last time around were actually carved out eventually by the time the legislative session ended.
So basically only applies to Austin?
It basically only applies to Austin, but I think even then, there's people who have seen the outcome of that and are wanting to make sure that doesn't happen in their communities as well. So we'll be monitoring that and acting accordingly as that comes up during the legislative session.
Have you
We have on
quantified?
our agenda, this is right to this point, we have on our agenda folks who de-annexed who want to re-annex.
Really?
Yeah. I haven't seen the details yet, but my staff told me that there are
And I think
folks
people-
who de-annexed who want to re-annex.
I think some people weren't aware of the services they would
That's
lose.
right.
But has the city begun to quantify the lost tax revenue?
I actually I can get an answer to that question. I don't have that answer right now.
Thanks.
So I'm going to move us along because it is 1:08, and we're going to need like 5 minutes at the end to talk about a few other things. So let's move on to Travis County. Julie Wheeler, feel free to introduce yourself and share your presentation.
Great, thank you. Help make that part, sorry. I don't know how to do it either. Hi, y'all. I'm Julie Wheeler. I'm the Intergovernmental Relations Officer in Travis County. I am going to talk really fast, so I'm so sorry, but we're going to, thanks, Edna. We're going to try to get through it really quickly. So, as Rick said, session does not start until January, but we're already in the middle of it. They are going to be operating with a ton of money yet again, so $20 billion. We won't know until we get the revenue estimate in January what that true number will be. But again, as it sits, $20 billion, $23.8 billion in the rainy day fund. So Texas is not going to have a problem with money, but it will have a problem with not wanting to spend that money. And so that will continue to be, I think, a pressure point as we're moving through the session. Some topics that we think will continue to dominate, and I don't want to talk vouchers long because that's not my area of interest, but we do know that vouchers in some way or another will continue to be a primary focus for them. Commissioner Shea, to your point, development, regulatory authority, elimination of the ETJ, those are issues that the county will heavily be following, and we do see a continuation of those conversations. One thing of interest for us that we're very excited about is that there finally is an interest in continuing for looking at water infrastructure investments. Lastly, public-funded lobbying prohibitions. I love the City of Austin's terminology. I need to put that one into my brain. That will be something that we continue to see on the horizon. So I'm not going to go through this other than to say there's a lot of turnover that we've seen. For us, that becomes a challenge with the institutional knowledge that we lose. With the development as of today about the speaker's race, that really is going to throw a lot of things into massive change. Many of the committee chairs that we expected to see coming back, if Phelan had retained the speakership, are all on the table now. So if you haven't heard, Dustin Burrows is starting to look, I think might actually be the one who has it in the bag, but as they say, it's not over until it's over. We do know that it is likely that Democrats will not be holding any chairs this session. That has been on the horizon and is not a shock to, I think, any of us here. Going through our legislative framework, we have 4 sections, so principles for legislative action, our priority positions, those are the bills that we're actually trying to advance. Policy positions, which are sort of general takes on anything and everything. As Rick said, 8,000 plus bills this session. That's really what guides our activity on how we take positions on those bills. And then positions on other proposals. So we are always happy to hear from our partners about the initiatives that they are spearheading. And if needed, we would love to be engaged on those and help try to advance those as well. So, sorry, I'm recovering my voice still. So hopefully it will not go out on me before I am done. I'm going to skip through this really quickly. I just want to highlight that counties are an arm of the state. And so what that means, we can only do what the state allows us to do. We really serve an administrative function for them. And so when you look at our bills and our legislation, you'll see that we really operate in mechanics. So not big sweeping change, but anything we want to do, if law says we can't, we've got to fight for that, even if it's like 1 or 2 words changed in a statute. Let's see. Okay, so I wanted to spend the next couple of seconds talking about the two of the 6 bills that we think will have an impact with all 3 entities. So the first of those is looking at trying to repurpose some of the buildings that are decommissioned from the Austin State Hospital after their redesign. Travis County has been talking about diversion efforts, and so that's really something that I think will impact the community as we look at ways to help folks before they have to go to jail. If they're in a mental health crisis, we really think that needs to be separated from the criminal justice system. The other bill that we're looking at is surplus property donation. This actually came about when we were trying to work with the City of Austin to take a look at equipment that we had decommissioned, and how could we donate that? Again, because counties are an arm of the state, we don't have the authority to actually do that. And so this bill would try to open up that process and make it easier for us to work in partnership with each other, and hopefully also work in partnership with local nonprofits who can utilize equipment that we no longer have a use for. Let's see. Okay. These two bills really are county focused. One is resolving some issues around the fire code, county bail bond board meetings. That is, I don't think, any of interest to this group, but it does matter to the county. Another one, deer management, so managing the deer population in the Balcones Canyonland Preserve. And then waste management, which I do think as we move through potential de-annexation legislation, will have a greater impact in providing waste management services to our folks who still live in the unknown of the ETJ. Looking at our policy positions, I won't go through these. You guys can take a look at this, but really it hits all of the major interests that have an impact to the county. So anything from elections, how we manage our workforce and benefits, emergency service provision, environmental regulation, growth management, and land use. That really is where I think I spend most of my time, it feels like, each session as we go forward. Health and human services issues, anything from gun safety, overdose prevention. We would love to see fentanyl test strips decriminalized. That also remains a priority, and we'll see how far we can get on that. Again, justice planning issues, mobility and transportation. We would love to see an expansion of rail. We would love to be supportive in any way that we can help alleviate congestion and traffic in Central Texas. Taxation, revenue, and budget. As Rick mentioned, revenue caps passed, but there's still ways that they're looking at trying to put limitations in place for us, especially as it relates to debt, and that's something that we'll be monitoring closely. As Rick mentioned again, technology, so broadband affordability becomes the issue here locally. It's not that we don't have those services, it's just that we have a high number of folks who can't afford that. Lastly, before I am done, I wanted to point out again, growth management and land use. In addition to talking about the ETJ, there's also a renewed interest in looking at special purpose districts, so not something I think that really impacts the city quite so much, but as we continue to develop here in Travis County, we are seeing a number of MUDs, special purpose districts. They crop up. The county doesn't have any sort of hand in regulation of those, but they do have a massive impact to our constituents, have huge tax bases, and may not necessarily allow for representation from those citizens that are being served. That was it in a very quick nutshell. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'm also very happy to pass it on to Edna.
Thank you very much. Any questions on this? Okay. Well,
Okay, I'm going to breeze through these things, and you have the priorities in your packets, so you can read them at your leisure. But I'll just highlight some of them. Our board has already passed these priorities. They passed the first set dealing with funding and recapture in June, and then the other priorities were adopted in November. And with input from Austin ISD Advocacy Advisory Committee, and we did online surveys to our community for their input. Let's see. Jacob, did you? Oh, there we go. Okay, fair funding. This is probably the most important thing to Austin ISD is an increase in the basic allotment adjusted for inflation, require that recapture dollars be spent on education, ending the practice that the legislature has done for years in supplanting the money that it provides to education with the recapture dollars. Study on the true cost of education, update the allotments to reflect actual costs of the programs, increase the special education funding to cover actual costs of providing services. And I noted that AISD is underfunded by over $78 million for special education. And then fund schools on the basis of enrollment rather than attendance. Recapture reform. There are various very creative recommendations here. For example, commission a study on the impact of recapture on housing affordability, factor into the demographics of the student population in determining the amount of recapture paid by districts. We are the highest payer of recapture because we have very high property values, but our families are not necessarily wealthy. And then convert 2 copper pennies to 2 golden pennies. Golden pennies are not subject to recapture. That would help us tremendously. Then on public accountability for public funds. Our board voted to oppose vouchers and any other term by which vouchers are named, tax credits, savings grants, et cetera. And then another related priority, opposing vouchers that are exempt from the state and federal accountability and admissions requirements that are applicable to public schools. Charter schools. Charter schools, currently charter schools a school has to apply for a charter. Once a charter is granted, the charter can expand geographically, enrollment-wise, grade-wise, where they set up. For example, IDEA Charter School started in the Valley. It is now in many, many cities in the city of Austin. So there are some priorities around putting more community input into that system. And then also authorize the State Board of Education to exercise veto authority over expansions. They currently have veto authority over approvals by the Commissioner of Education. Accountability and assessment. Establish a system that looks beyond high-stakes multiple-choice exams. Mandate a grace period of at least 1 year in the assignment of campus and district ratings following significant changes to STAR end-of-course exams and/or the accountability system. Local control and governance. These are very similar to what the city and county have as priorities. Oppose unfunded mandates and infringements on local control. Again, oppose measures that would prohibit the school district from having representation at the legislature. And then there's been legislation in the recent past years that put more restrictions or more requirements on language for bond measures and tax ratification. So this priority says that we oppose legislation regarding bond elections that increase the ballot language requirements, limit when elections are held, or that create additional requirements for elections. There have been bills filed in the past that would require a supermajority vote in order to increase taxes and approve bonds. Parent and family involvement. Last session, there were a lot of bills that were labeled as parental choice. There don't seem to be as many so far this session. But we do have a couple of priorities here that would not allow one family or two families to impose whatever they oppose on all families in our district. So this is primarily what this is about. Security and safety, increase the school safety allotment. This is an underfunded mandate that was passed last session, House Bill 3. AISDs, all school districts are underfunded in this area. AISD is underfunded by over $14 million. And then we also have a priority on establishing a criminal offense for openly carrying a firearm on or within 300 feet of district property. Student supports, increased funding for counselors, both for college and career counseling and for mental health counseling. Reduce the use of exclusionary discipline and keep students in school whenever possible instead of disciplinary placements. Protect and support an equitable educational environment that values diversity of race, national origin, culture, gender, religions, and immigration status. And this is, very important to our district because we want to protect our children, especially in the face of what may be happening on the federal level with mass deportations. And oppose the ability of the state to restrict programs in school districts that promote acceptance and respect for all students. Teachers oppose legislation that undermines the professionalism of teachers, such as eliminating requirement that teachers have college degrees, or mandate curriculum that narrows educators' ability to adapt lesson plans in response to local needs. And you may have read in the paper yesterday or today about the certification scams, where they're, I don't know, manufacturing that they're certified. That has not happened in Austin, and we want to maintain that requirement that the teachers be certified. And so basically, that's it. You can find these on our website. They're in your packets. And I also, during the session, I put out what I call a Friday email, and it will have a table that lists our board's priorities and then the bills that support those priorities, because we have a lot of parents who want to know what they can do, how they can help AISD, and so they can just go to that table and see what bills support our priorities, and they can weigh in as they wish. And then finally, I wanted to mention that there is a great website called fundschoolsfirst.org that was developed by some of our colleagues in North Texas, and it basically states that in order to bring school districts up to the 2019 funding levels, which is when we were last given a raise by the legislature, factored for inflation, it would require $10 billion. And this is all based on legislative budget board numbers and TEA numbers. And then it also has a function where you can, if the basic allotment is increased by $100, how much that would increase teacher salaries, how much that would increase special education, safety allotment. It's like 4 things, and you can just plug in $500. How much is that going to impact these 4 areas? $1,000. So anyway, so that's a really great tool, and I recommend it highly. Anyway, thank you.
Wow. Thank you all so much. Yes, this was, it's heavy stuff. We have a lot ahead of us when session starts, and I feel very well informed about what we're all doing. And I think we're going to have to keep having updates on this probably throughout the session. So thank you all so much for all the work that you've done, and we will continue
Madam
talking.
Chair,
Yes.
I like the idea of continually being informed, but there are some positions where all 3 entities share the same opinion. Maybe we ought to think about putting a communication together where we are aligned, that at least puts in the hands of the Travis County delegation. This is where we are. If this item comes up, we'll testify, but this is our stated position.
Love that. Thank you. Is that something that maybe the staff can work on? Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so I'm sorry we don't have time for too much Q&A, but I wanted to give you a little bit of good news, I guess. We have a student, there's a student election clerks program that many of you may know about that's done by the county. And I don't know if y'all know about this, but this program basically allows kids who are 16 years old to earn $20 an hour to work at our polling locations, and it's amazing, and they never fill all their slots. And so this year we spoke with Diana Limon Mercado, and we're like, we're going to fill all those slots. And boy, did we. They got about a 500% increase in applications. We had students from every single AISD high school apply. They only allowed like less than half of students who applied could actually end up being student election clerks. But there's a little handout in your packet that gives all the details. But one cute thing that I do want to turn your attention to is we actually had students at Bailey Middle School design their own little I voted stickers, which I think look awesome. So, and I think they were actually distributed at some of the polling locations, but we've heard so much good feedback on the program. AISD has really been instituting this culture of voting for the last few years. So now Election Day is a holiday. We really encourage our staff to go out and vote. We all make sure we voted and we talk about it on the dais. We have really good voter registration in Travis County. The turnout is not as good as our registration levels are. And so this was a way for us to really getting our kids familiar with voting in a nonpartisan way, but just being out there at the polls and understanding what it's all about. And I think it was a great success, and I look forward to more of that. So with that, let's see. Are there any questions about anything about the voting or any urgent questions that anyone has? Okay, then I will move on and just say, are there any questions or discussion on our standing items, which are, so basically, are there any things that you want to put on the next agenda? This is your time to share. And then we also have to think about our next meeting date, and it'll be at Travis County, by the way. And so we're looking at March dates for that. So agenda items, yes.
So I didn't get a chance to speak earlier, but I wanted to just thank all the staff who support the work of this committee. It's been great to work with you and appreciate all your leadership on all the issues outside of this committee that you're leading on, so thank you for that. I did want to just flag for the committee moving forward that we had asked staff to work on some of the transparency. It's very hard for people to find this committee because it's posted only where it is. And we need some system so that people know that there's on every one of our systems that people know a committee is coming up and that the agendas are posted so that the work doesn't go unseen and that folks know that this is a forum where we can help, they can bring issues, et cetera. So I did want to just flag that for you.
Absolutely. Okay, so I think we have a legislative update for March for our next meeting. And I don't know. Oh, gosh, I know, for real. Any other topics? Probably updates on the Prop As, the two Prop As. If there's anything to share, might be helpful. If they're interested in that, probably a brief update. Any other topics? Okay. Well, if you guys have ideas, feel free to send them to your respective staff member. And with that, I will ask for a motion to adjourn. All right. So having a motion by Commissioner Trevelyan, second by Councilmember Alter. All those in favor to adjourn the meeting, raise your right hand. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you all very much and happy holidays. A minute early. We did it.
I think this program really benefits the students because it gives them the hands-on experience that they need that's more like an actual job versus just sitting in a classroom. So it's giving them really relevant experience that they need for the workforce for whenever they graduate.
It allowed me opportunities of networking, not just with city officials and other city departments, but with organizations outside of the city, such as the Nature Conservancy. Out of high school, I interned with them for a summer doing different database information collection for them, specifically along Waller Creek, and specifically in partnership with like Waterloo Greenway Conservancy. And so I would say it's helped me grow professionally. I've gained so many skills just as being a park ranger, especially here in the city.
They teach me about wildlife and take care of it when I see something, or and it gives me a job too, so it's benefit for each way.